10 hottest cowboys played by old Hollywood actors. Who played it best? 10 hottest cowboys played by old Hollywood actors. Do you remember the first time a wide hat cut across the sky and a horn line told you everything before a word was spoken? Toughness and hotness weren't a shout back then. It was a look, a gait, a hand that didn't tremble when the street went quiet. Tonight, we're counting down the men who carved that feeling into us. 10 faces that still smell like dust and saddle soap. You're number one now in the comments. No edits after you watch. Was the toughest a marshal who stood alone at noon, or a poncho drifter who didn't waste breath on threats? One of our top picks will test old loyalties. Number 2 versus number 1 is a real standoff. Let's start where menace wears a grin and the code runs deep. Number 10. Lee Marvin. A bruiser with a code, some heavy snarl to prove they're dangerous. Lee Marvin just smiled like he knew the ending. At 6 feet 2 inches, with shoulders built for dock work, he didn't strut in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. He occupied the street. Watch the way he stands, sideways at the bar, hat slanted, using every inch of that imposing frame like the town exists for his entertainment. No flapping coat, no big speech, just a lazy grin, and the certainty that when the room goes quiet, it's because he wanted it that way. Tougher than any growl. A man who doesn't need to announce himself because everyone already heard the message. But Marvin wasn't only the nightmare in a black hat. A decade later, in Monte Walsh, that 230-pound frame carries different weight. The menace turns inward. The gun is still there. But it's the knowing look of a cowhand who's outlived the world he was built for. No hysteria, no grand goodbye, just that worn dignity you and I recognize from men who did their job until the job disappeared. Toughness changes shape with age. Marvin shows you how. He lets the silence answer questions the young men can't even ask yet. You can feel it in the professionals too, when he gives orders without raising his voice. That gravely calm, carried on those broad shoulders is its own kind of threat. He doesn't move fast, he moves decisive. Even when a script leans funny, like the two-fisted gag in Cat Ballou, Marvin's punchline lands heavy because all 6 feet, 2 inches of him could back up every joke. The laugh never empties the gun. There's always a line you don't cross. A rule you keep even when nobody's watching. A code. Not the pretty kind, the useful kind, the one that lets a man sleep. If you saw Liberty Valance on the Late Show after the news, you remember that hush when his tall frame stepped out of the shadow. For those of us who wore out the tape on Monty Walsh, it wasn't just nostalgia. Who felt the truth of a trait fading and a man refusing to cheapen it on the way out? That kind of toughness doesn't shout, it holds. In number 9, Steve McQueen, Pressure Under Glass. Some actors play tough by getting louder. Steve McQueen got quieter. In The Magnificent Seven, he's not the biggest man in the room at 5 feet 9 inches and 160 pounds. He's the one your eyes keep returning to. As Vin, those compact, precise hands fiddle with a hat brim, a cartridge, weigh the street like a scale. Little business, steady movement from a frame built for efficiency. The message is simple. This man's pulse doesn't jump. The less he moves, the more the danger grows. If you first met him as Josh Randall on Wanted Dead or Alive, you remember the oddity that made him unforgettable. The mare's leg looked proportional in his hands because he understood tools. He didn't whip it around for applause. He used it like a craftsman picking up a wrench. Automatic, unshowy, inevitable. Even his walk had a low hum to it. That stocky 5 foot 9 inch frame, moving like a motor idling. By Nevada Smith, every pound of that compact build paces his rage. No rants, no speeches, just controlled power in a deceptively average frame that never spills until it must. McQueen's trick is restraint. He steps into a scene and lets silence do the heavy lifting. You think you're watching nothing happen, then you realize your shoulders are tight and you don't know when you stopped breathing. There's a reason people still talk about his chess match with Yul Brynner. On The Magnificent Seven, the black-clad king at 6 feet versus the man who steals scenes with dust and daylight. McQueen's 5 feet 9 inches frame, tilting a hat here, reloading there, always giving the camera something to love without ever begging for it. Toughness can be timing. McQueen's was clockwork. What makes him different from the shout and snarl cowboys is economy. He saved words, he saved movement, he saved emotion. When he finally spends any of it from that efficient frame, the whole street pays attention. Watch the way he leans, the way he glances at a rooftop, the way the corner of his mouth tightens before a draw. That's not posing, that's calculation carried in a bottle built for precision. He made cool feel like a kind of courage. The courage to wait an extra beat while everyone else blinked, using every ounce of that compact presence to maximum effect. Number 8, Audie Murphy, quiet, lethal calm. Some men look dangerous because they posture. Audie Murphy looked dangerous because he didn't. At 5 feet 5 inches and barely 140 pounds soaking wet, he turned size into irrelevance. In No Name on the Bullet, he rides in like death with manners. That slight frame gives the town a fixed look and lets everyone else unravel. By sundown, men who were brave at breakfast are bargaining with their own nerves while this wiry stranger waits. That's not swagger, that's an icicle. The gun barely moves. The danger is the stillness. On paper, he was the decorated soldier every newspaper knew. The most decorated American of World War II. All 140 pounds of him. On screen, he turned that compact intensity into something you don't often see in Westerns, a patience that scares. As John Gant, his small stature makes the threat more unsettling. He doesn't chase anyone, he waits. The town comes to him. People whisper that he never misses, and somehow the whisper does more damage than a dozen pistol shots from bigger men. The 1950s gave him plenty of straight arrow leads. The Kid from Texas, Ride Clear of Diablo, Drums Across the River. Good men, steady aims, just as served by someone who looked like he should be selling papers, not facing down killers. But the revelation is what happens when the light shifts. Murphy's boyish face goes quiet, and you understand why men who've seen too much don't waste energy on size or bluster. His walk tells you everything. No hurry, no heat, nothing to prove from a frame that proved everything overseas. There's a different kind of courage in No Name on the Bullet. That slight frame almost never raises his voice. He doesn't need to. The town does it for him. Accusations, confessions, old sins bubbling up because a quiet man rode in and looked them in the eye. That's colder than any outlaw flourish carried on bigger shoulders. Number 7. James Stewart, Conscience with a Mean Streak. We grew up thinking James Stewart was the soft voice that talked the room back from the ledge. Then the 50s Westerns arrived and proved something tougher. That 6 foot 3 inch frame could harden. In Winchester 73, he isn't the aw shucks neighbor anymore. He's using every inch of his ranginess to chase a rifle like it holds his soul. Every step is lean, every look edged from a man whose lanky build suddenly feels like a loaded weapon. With director Anthony Mann, Stewart found a new gear. Call it conscience under pressure. In The Naked Spur, he's a bounty hunter at 165 pounds of sinewy determination, dragging a prisoner through rock and snow, fighting not just the bad men behind him, but the worst thoughts inside him. He bargains with himself more than with anyone else. You can feel the line he swore not to cross, and how close those long legs keep carrying him toward it. That's a kind of toughness the loud cowboys never learn, holding the rope when your hands are already raw. Bend of the River gives you another flavor. The reformed man trying to stay reformed while the gold rush tugs at old habits. Stewart's angular frame plays temptation like a fever. He's quiet until he isn't. And when he snaps, you believe it because that tall, earnest build tried so hard not to. By the man from Laramie. The rage is coiled in those long bones. He walks into a town with a mystery and leaves with a ledger settled. Not by big speeches, but by a set jaw and a willingness to stand where it hurts. What makes this version of Stewart tough isn't speed on the draw. It's the moral drag he carries up every hill on that 6 foot 3 inch frame. He looks tired the way real men look tired. Sleep lost to bad memories, not bad living. When he says no, it sounds like a prayer he's asked before. And when he finally says yes to the fight, the room takes a breath because the good man just gave himself permission to be dangerous. Number 6. Gary Cooper, High Noon Spine. Some men look tough because the hat fit right. Gary Cooper looked tough because the clock said so. Is 6 feet 3 inches and 185 pounds of prairie lean muscle, he carries High Noon Street like it was measured for his stride. No gang of friends, no posse riding in. Will Kane, with a badge that suddenly weighs like iron on that lanky frame. Watch how he carries the street. Long strides, eyes forward, jaw set like a promise. He doesn't talk himself brave. He just keeps walking while the town looks away. We older folks remember the first time we saw it, maybe on a Sunday night broadcast. The edges of the picture a little snowy. You could feel the air thicken as the train got closer. Cooper doesn't puff up or pound the table. That ranginess stays loose, ready. And somehow the whole room leans toward the set. He lets the quiet do it, while every inch of his height holds the center. When he checks the door, when he glances down an empty alley, you realize you've been holding your breath for 10 minutes. But the steal wasn't a one-picture accident. In The Westerner, his tall frame plays a drifter whose manners hide a spine. In Veracruz, he trades smiles with danger and never once loses the count. In Man of the West, the civility cracks just enough to show the furnace underneath those long bones. Cooper's cowboys aren't showy. They're the kind of men who let you underestimate them, then pay the bill in full with every lean inch. Yeah, people argued for years about what high noon meant. What matters on the screen is simpler. A man does the right thing when it's lonely to do it, using that commanding 6'3" presence to fill an empty street. He doesn't win by being the loudest or the fastest. He wins by not leaving. That's a toughness the quick draw artists never quite learn. Staying put when leaving would be easy. Cooper taught a generation that grit can whisper and still be heard clear to the depot. The badge isn't an ornament, it's a vow carried on the right frame. Number 5. James Arness, the marshal who never blinked. Some cowboys won you with speed. James Arness won you with steadiness. At 6 feet 7 inches and 235 pounds, Marshal Matt Dillon didn't fidget. He placed himself like a monument in the dust of Dodge. Those massive shoulders squared to the problem. Boots planted, hat brimmed low, over eyes that did the measuring. That mountain of a man didn't threaten the town into good behavior. He calmed it there with sheer presence. Television made him our weekly law. 20 seasons, year after year, that towering silhouette walking down Front Street. The same patience with fools, drunks, and men who arrived ready to test their luck. Against 6 feet, 7 inches of frontier justice, Gunsmoke wasn't fireworks. It was ritual. Dillon listened first, then gave a man one last chance. Then only drew if the draw had been earned, using those enormous hands with surprising gentleness. You could feel the ethic in the details. The way he removed a gun from a hothead like a father taking away a match. Those massive palms making any pistol look like a toy. The way he stood between fear and a stranger without a drumbeat or speech. Even in the barroom brawls, Arness spent his size like money, only what the moment required. When that giant frame said, "That's enough," the room believed him. We watched him with family habits wrapped around the set. The theme music, the opening walk, the years when Chester limped into the frame, and the years when Festus argued his way across it. That commanding presence anchored 20 years of television. A weekly reminder that law could be patient and still unbreakable. Was he perfect? No. He was human. He'd warned the wrong man, trusted the right one too long, paid for mercy with a bruise, and a long stare out the window. But watching all 6 feet 7 inches of him carry that badge made duty look like muscle memory. Number 4. Clint Walker, the gentle giant you didn't want to cross. Some stars filled the screen with chatter. Clint Walker filled it with calm. At 6 feet 6 inches and 240 pounds of solid muscle, he had the build of a lumberjack and the temperament of a monk. As Cheyenne body, that massive frame rode in tall, hat low, shoulders like a doorframe. And did the hardest thing a Western hero can do? He waited. No flinch, no fuss, just a steady look that told the troublemaker exactly how this would end. When the fist finally flew, it wasn't for show. It was housekeeping. He'd lift a man like luggage and set him down the way you'd set down a mistake. Firm, final. No need to say it twice. Television had plenty of cowboys, but Cheyenne felt different. It was one of the first hour-long TV westerns, and Walker's extraordinary physique made the frame behave. Those 240 pounds didn't crowd the screen with movement. They owned it by standing still. You could read his code in the small choices. The way those huge hands stayed open until they didn't, the way he let a bully talk himself brave, the way his voice dropped half an inch when it was time to stop pretending. The films backed it up. In Fort Dobbs, his imposing presence plays a man whose silence keeps him alive. In Yellowstone Kelly, that barrel chest turns a frontier scout into a wall of patience. In Gold of the Seven Saints, he's the partner you pick when the canyon narrows. In Night of the Grizzly, all 6 feet 6 inches of him meets the wilderness with the same unruffled will he used on men. What ties them together isn't a trick draw or a fancy speech. It's the sense that rooms calm when that mountain of muscle arrives. Off-screen, the legend only got larger. In 71, a skiing accident drove a pole into his chest. They said he wouldn't make it. That powerful frame pulled him through. He came back to work with a scar and a smile and the same unhurried grace. But proving even real danger couldn't keep 240 pounds of determination down. For those of us who watched Cheyenne on a 19-inch with rabbit ears, the memory is tactile. That enormous silhouette filling our small screens, making every other TV cowboy look undersized by comparison. Number 3. Randolph Scott. Flint and silence. Some cowboys talk you into believing them. Randolph Scott makes you believe by saying almost nothing. At 6 feet 2 inches and 180 pounds of weathered leather, he rides in like a pencil line across the horizon. Straight back, quiet eyes, a yes sir courtesy that never softens the steel underneath. That tall, spare frame stays low. The jaw doesn't move much, and when a man tries him, Scott answers with economy. One step, one word, one shot. Toughness distilled. The late 50s run with Bud Bettacher is where his desert lane frame turns surgical. 7 Men From Now, The Tall T, Ride Lonesome, Comanche Station. No grand towns to hide in, just hardpan, mesquite, and choices you live with carried on shoulders built for the long haul. Scott's men aren't quick-draw showboats. They're problem solvers. That ranginess stands angled to the wind, weighs the odds, and does the necessary. Watch how he gives an outlaw room to do the wrong thing. Then watch how fast that room disappears. What separates him isn't anger. It's resolve carried on the right frame. Scott plays decency like a blade kept oiled, using every inch of his height without wasting emotion. A woman in trouble gets respect without speeches. A partner in doubt gets one more chance, not two. And when a bully leans in close, Scott's eyes move first. Everything else follows. There's a quiet courtesy to him that older viewers recognize. His 6'2" frame tips its hat without giving an inch. He says, "Ma'am," and somehow, the room gets safer. The gun is the last argument, not the first. But when the final talk arrives, he doesn't hurry it or dress it up. He just does right by the code he carries, even if nobody's left to notice. People love to argue which one is the truest cut. The Tall T has that well-side chill. Ride Lonesome carries a private reckoning you can feel in your ribs. 7 Men From Now moves like a clock with a heartbeat. None of them waste a frame, and all of them prove that with the right build and the right stillness, you could time patience with a shadow. Long, steady, never lost. What lasts is the work. A man whose spare weathered frame could make a desert feel crowded just by standing still. Number 2, Clint Eastwood. The man with no name, no mercy. Some cowboys warn you with words. Clint Eastwood warns you by doing nothing. At 6 feet 4 inches and 185 pounds of coiled wire, he learned restraint in the rawhide years. Rowdy Yates, using that hide and reach to watch the herd, saving motion like a precious thing. Then the movies turned that lanky patience into a weapon. In that poncho, those long legs aren't asking you to understand him. They're giving you time to make a mistake. The man with no name isn't noble on paper. He's a calculator carried on a frame built for the long game. In a fistful of dollars, for a few dollars more, the good, the bad, and the ugly, he doesn't fill the street with speeches. He empties it with stillness. That 6'4" silhouette spends one look, one step, one shot, and keeps the change. The smallest gesture feels expensive. Glove adjusts, holster settles, eyes narrow, and somehow the whole town pays for it. Back home, Hang 'em High puts a rope scar across that angular neck and asks if justice can be colder than revenge. He barely raises his voice. He doesn't have to. With that commanding presence, the law becomes a quiet instrument in those long-fingered hands, and the room understands he'll use it. In 2 Mules for Sister Sarah, on 1970, he can play wry without softening the edge. The grin never reaches the trigger finger, carried on that lean frame. What made Eastwood tough wasn't size or speed, it was control. At 6 feet 4 inches, he knew exactly how long a heartbeat lasted on a quiet street, and he made you live inside it. He understood how much space a man could fill when he chose his moments, using every inch of that imposing height to create shadows other men had to live in. There's a reason film folks still argue over the lineage of that first poncho legend. What we got on the screen was a new kind of cowboy. Not the town's conscience, not its teacher, its test. Fail it, and the sand remembers where you fell under that towering, merciless gaze. Number 1, John Wayne, the yardstick. Some men wore the hat, John Wayne wore the West. At 6 feet 4 inches and 225 pounds in his prime, he had the frame to fill Monument Valley and the presence to make it feel small. From the first time he climbs onto the stagecoach step, as the Ringo Kid, you feel the air change. Those broad shoulders squared, that substantial weight set, eyes doing the measuring. He doesn't rush the frame, he claims it. The voice is slower than the danger, which is why the danger listens. He doesn't need fireworks, he has presence. That steady forward lean, carried on the perfect build that tells the street, I'm here now, act accordingly. Every era gives that imposing physique a different test. In Red River, he's Tom Dunson, using every ounce of his bulk to be a trail boss who treats miles like enemies and wins by outstaring the horizon. It's not bluster, it's ballast, carried on shoulders built for the job. In the searches, all 225 pounds of Ethan Edwards turns into a storm that never quite breaks. A man whose edges cut even when he's quiet on a porch. And when the years catch up, the shootist lets him look the end in the eye without blinking, every inch of that legendary frame refusing to yield. Look closer, and you can see the craft that made the myth. He learned how to move from the stuntman who wrote the language of screen action, and he kept the lesson simple. Plant your feet, let the punch read, or ride clean, never waste emotion. The walk, hips set, shoulders easy, wasn't an accident. It was 225 pounds of presence refined until it felt inevitable. Wayne understood that a cowboy doesn't have to be the fastest gun if he's the surest man. And at 6 feet 4 inches, he could afford to be patient. If you met him first on a Saturday matinee, popcorn warm, poster sun faded, or later on a Sunday TV print with the family gathered, you remember the room going quiet before he spoke. That commanding frame would tip a hat, weigh a fool, and give a man one last chance to be better. When that failed, the draw was unhurried and final. No gloat, no parade, just the work done and the badge or the trail handed back to the day. People will argue number one forever, but measure any cowboy against him and you'll end up using his dimensions. But was he the saint of the saddle? No. He could be hard, stubborn, wrong. And that, strangely, made the right moments land harder on that substantial frame. The myth isn't that he never bent. The myth is that when it mattered, all 6 feet 4 inches and 225 pounds of him held. So, what did we just measure? Marvin showed that menace can smile. McQueen proved quiet can rattle a room. Murphy taught us calm can be lethal. Stewart carried a conscience like iron. Cooper walked into noon and didn't turn. Arnes made patience into law. Walker let strength whisper. Scott cut with dry resolve. Eastwood weaponized silence. And Wayne, love him or argue him, remains the yard we use for every stride after. If you watch these on a black and white set with rabbit ears, leave your city and station below. Who did we underrate? Who would you swap? Your call? Pan toughest Western villains next, or should we ride into swashbucklers?